Greetings, fellow humans, and welcome to a new episode of Emily throwing herself into creative projects. So, what with lockdown happening, I had a larger than average amount of time to look at the various contents of my house, including observing my cats and observing their cat tree or cat tower. We bought Twig, who's the younger one, a very tall floor-to-ceiling cat tree. The reason being that she likes climbing things, and if we don't give her something that we're happy for her to climb, she will climb everything, including bookshelves, mantelpieces. She'll get into all sorts of high places that we don't want her to be. Part of lockdown for me was discovering that suddenly I was deeply dissatisfied with the very large amount of the aesthetic qualities of my household, and so I decided to undertake a cat tree makeover. Not by restructuring it in any way, but just by making it prettier. I thought I would have a look through my fabric stash and see what fabrics I could find that would make nice cat tree coverings, cushions. Can't think of another C word, not that one. So I found a couple. This lovely thing. My mum randomly gives me fabric with cats on it, and also because I love pink and green, she gives me pink and green things on a very regular basis. This is one of those things. It's not a very large amount, I think it's 1/4 meter, but we'll find a way of using it. I can't fold. When going through my stash, I found this. Now this is a collection of 5 fat quarters. I think I actually bought them to make something for the cats, because I'm like that. However, I discovered the colours that are in this fat quarter collection match this very well. So basically, I think I'm going to combine these two for some of the makeover pieces. And lastly, this is a fabric I'm really excited about because when I was a kid, living in Vancouver, my mum found an item of clothing in a charity shop that she ripped apart and turned into a skirt for me, and I think I might have had like a matching waistcoat, and I could sit there and say, oh, it was the 90s, but really I was just a weird kid. So we have this rainbow cat fabric. God, it's already got cat fur on it. This is going to turn into the other parts. I don't have enough of any of these fabrics to make one cohesive look, so basically it's going to be a crazy rainbow Technicolor cat tree, because that's what we've got right now.
I started by taking the existing cushions and coverings off the tree so I could measure them. This cat tree has 1 circular cushion, a hammock, and 2, we call them donuts, but they're pretty normal cat beds with a kind of round base and a ring of cushion around them. I took all of the measurements I needed and made a note of them on my phone. Twig got involved in the measuring process because she needed to make sure I was doing things properly. Definitely didn't have anything to do with wanting to play. Definitely not.
That's mine. It's mine.
Armed with my measurements, I went to work cutting out fabric. I'd mentioned to my mum that I was undertaking this project and she posted me a few extra bits that might help, but I started with the fat quarters pinned together so that I could cut them at the same time without them slipping. I placed the circular cushion on top and traced around it with a pencil, being sure to leave a seam allowance. I cut around the traced outline and put the scraps to the side for later. I stole one of the donut beds and used some parchment paper to trace out the shape of the base of the bed. I did have the measurements, but the base was an odd, not quite semicircle, not quite circle shape, and I needed to make sure that the new beds I was making were a similar shape. So making a pattern by tracing the existing bed seemed like the smartest move, if a little sloppy. Now, because I was making 2 donut beds, I needed 4 base-shaped pieces of fabric. I took one of the base fabrics, given to me by my mama, and folded it into 3, and again pinned the layers together to prevent them from slipping. I then took the pattern for the base of the bed and traced around it with chalk before cutting those pieces out. For the donut beds, I also needed 1.5 metre cushions to go around the outside of them, but none of my fabric was that long, so I cut pieces to sew together to make the right size of fabric. Tealeaf, the chubby black and white cat, seems to like a lot of cushion to snooze on, so I made this one pretty hefty. This donut bed will go on the lowest level of the cat tree because that's the only level Tealeaf can reach. He's not great at jumping. The second donut bed is for Twig, and she's not big on cushions, so after cutting one more piece of fabric for the base of her bed, I cut some much narrower strips of fabric, again sent to me by my mum, to make a smaller cushion around the edge of Twig's bed. It was then time to cut out some batting. Now, batting is a material that's used to provide cushioning or insulation between layers of fabric. It's most often used in quilting and upholstery. I pinned all the pieces that needed some cushioning to 2 layers of batting, again to stop them from slipping around while I was cutting them out, and cut each shape out of the batting. I folded the rainbow cat fabric in half, right sides out, and I pinned it to the 2 base pieces of fabric that had the batting in between them, then sewed around the edge, making sure to leave a sizable gap in the stitching so that I could stuff the donut bed's cushion. I grabbed a wooden spoon to help me push the stuffing material into place in the tube, and I didn't have any proper stuffing, so I sacrificed a dying pillow. I pulled its guts out and fluffed them about to prevent lumpiness, then began the long process of stuffing and spooning the filling into the donut tube, regularly squishing it around to make sure it was evenly distributed, and again to prevent lumpiness. The next step was to sew the gap shut and complete the first donut bed. Now this was quite tricky because there was a lot of bulk and my sewing machine was not happy about it, but I did manage to get it done in the end. I followed the exact same process with the second donut bed. To figure out where to place the Velcro pieces on the bottom of the 2 donut beds, I took the pattern I'd made for their bases and traced the location of the Velcro on the wooden cat tree pieces so I would have a guide to follow. Then it was hammock making time. Because the main fabric I wanted to use wasn't large enough on its own, I used some scraps of orange fabric to cut a centerpiece for the underside of the hammock. I know I used scissors for all of the other parts of this project, but piecing fabric together takes a lot more precision, so I opted for a ruler and rotary cutter for this part. I also needed strips to go down each side of the hammock, so I cut 3 long pieces of yellow fabric and 3 long pieces of pink fabric, which I then seamed into really long strips of yellow fabric and pink fabric. I attached the orange middle piece to the main fabric and then the long yellow strip and long pink strip to each of the sides. I needed to make 18cm hems on 4 parts of the hammock so that it would slide smoothly onto the wooden beams that support it. And after that, I pinned the open sides of the hammock shut, sewing them while making sure to leave 9cm channels on each side of the seam. I did this on both sides of the hammock. The last cushion was the round one. I planned to sew around the edge and then turn it inside out, so I needed to leave a gap to be able to pull the fabric right side out with the batting sandwiched inside. I made a grave error here and did not leave a big enough gap. I didn't account for how thick the 2 layers of batting would be, and after fighting quite carefully with it to turn it right side out, I pulled a little bit too hard and it ripped. It ripped. At this point, I gave up a bit and just pulled it through with no care for the destruction I was causing. But after it had been turned right side out, I played around with my options and decided I would just use the buttonhole setting on my sewing machine to sew over the rip and reinforce it, and I would stick that ugly bit at the back where nobody would see it. It was then cat tree cushion placement time, that time we all know and love. I put all of the cushions and hammocks in their proper place, although I did have to tempt Tealeaf out of his old bed with a treat so I could put the new one there, but it was done. Twig was curious and came to investigate immediately and seemed very happy with all of the changes. Tealeaf, on the other hand, was doubtful. He did not trust the new bed. We tried to tempt him into the new bed with treats, which did work, temporarily. Later on, however, I discovered him snugged up on the floor in his old bed.
Tealeaf, why? I made you a nice new bed. I'm gonna have to hide it. I'm gonna have to hide your old donut.
In the late afternoon, I did discover him sitting in the donut, entirely of his own accord, but he was only there for about 5 minutes. But finally, after fall of night, he settled into the new bed and didn't seem to completely hate it. So we did get there eventually.
So there you go, cat tree makeover. I'm pretty pleased with it. I think it's quite pretty. The cats are indifferent, as they were always going to be, but I'm happy about it. If you enjoyed this strange foray into the things that I do with my time, then please like the video. If you would like to see other stuff I do, then hit subscribe and tap the little bell icon thingy so you get updates when I post. If you think this is cute and you think other people would like it, then share it around. That really helps me out. Do I have anything else to say? I think that this is a really good way of giving things a simple little lift and making them more your style and making them more fun. I really enjoyed this project and I hope you guys enjoyed watching me enjoy this project. Big love, and I will see you guys next time. Yes.